Hello, Dan Joss. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Good.
So, the other day, I was
Yeah,
hungry
the
in the
other
middle of the
day.
day, and I had this big old fat lamb burger, and it was great. It had cheese and onions, and it was so good. And then about an hour later, I felt, I'm stuffed, and I was dragging. And then today, when I got on the scale, I'm like, oh, that was a bad decision because it came
Man,
with
just
fries.
one sandwich.
Yeah, it was a big sandwich. So I'm thinking about regret.
Sure.
And I'm sure that there are some money things that have to do with regret. Like, I don't know,
Lots.
maybe student loans.
Lots, actually. Student loans, there is. There was a recent survey called CNBC plus Acorns Invest in You Student Loan Survey,
Wow, that's a mouthful.
recently completed, and there's some interesting findings.
Okay.
54%, so let's just say over half of the federal student loan borrowers said taking on that debt was not worth it.
Really? I'm surprised.
And the other less than 50%, about 45%, said it was worth it.
I wonder if the people who thought it was worth it are bringing in the big bucks, and the ones who thought it wasn't worth it are bringing in the not so big bucks.
Less than the big bucks?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it plays out.
Okay.
So if you borrow and what you think or hope to happen happens, like get a high-paying job, then it's worth it. You pay it back. And if what you hope to happen doesn't happen, then it's not worth it.
Okay.
So that should go into the calculation of whether a student gets a loan or not. What are the chances of actually getting a high-paying job?
Right. So in some ways, you could look at it like playing the lottery.
I suppose you could.
Well, I could.
Either way, you're going to have to make your payments, right? Either way,
Right.
you have to buy a ticket.
Either way, you have to buy a ticket. But if you go in saying, you know what, the odds of me getting this really super high paying job for a super high debt, well, maybe not so great.
Yeah, you have to kind of run the
Right.
cost benefit analysis.
Yeah. And then, of course, the opportunity cost that you're passing up because while you're in school, you're probably not earning the same as you would if you weren't in school.
Yeah, for what used to be 4 years is now becoming the standard 5 years.
Wow. Don't tell my kids that.
Borrowers get a reprieve from federal loan payments when the COVID-19 pandemic hit March 2000. And
A reprieve, but not a forgiveness.
they haven't had to make payments,
Okay.
and they haven't had interest accumulate.
Wow.
And current interest is now about 3.7%, up from 2.7 last year.
Okay.
Graduate student loans over 5%, and parents that get loans for their kids' school, that's over 6%. So interest starting to creep up a bit. But they haven't had to make payments. They haven't had interest accumulate. But as of now, that will restart in May.
Okay.
And so the survey responder said, well, if I have to start making payments again, then I won't be able to do other things that I've been doing with my money, like investing or saving for retirement or buying a home or paying off other debt.
Well, presumably they didn't have the money to make the payments anyway, so it's not like they won't have that money to do that with. They didn't have it before. So maybe they'll have the income to now they can make their payments.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And there's always political action whenever there's money to be had or not had. If I can get somebody to forgive my debt, then why not? Imagine if we could forgive all of our mortgage payments and
Wow, that would
car
be
payments and things like that.
that would be pretty amazing, and the people who were probably supposed to receive that money would be out of business. Maybe.
Could be.
Could
Seen
be.
a lot of people go out of business recently.
Right.
A counselor on the front end of these student loans said every dollar that a student borrows is going to cost them $2 by the time they repay the debt, and they don't really think about that. So that was his job as a counselor, was to point out the obvious, that it's going to cost you not what you borrow, but also interest on what you borrow. And,
Yep.
if you make a 10 or 15-year, 20-year plan to pay that back, it's going to be very, very expensive.
Right. Because the longer you owe it, the
more
longer
you owe.
you'll be paying interest.
Yeah, one borrower stated that she'd had $100,000 of student loan debt and still owed 10 years later $30,000. And
Wow.
she said, I used to think that having an MBA was smart, but now I'm kind of thinking it's a little silly.
Could be.
Not that the MBA is silly, but the way she financed that endeavor was,
Okay.
she is probably one of the more than half that regret the finance of debt for school choice she made.
Right.
So another survey result was that more than half say that student debt negatively affects their mental health.
I would think so. Student debt or any other kind of debt. It weighs on you.
So it's an interesting survey. There's going to be more articles with these results, each spinning their own story. But it looks like people that got debt for school, many now, more than half, don't think it was worth it. And it's affecting their mental health.
Wow.
So I thought that was interesting.
I would say it is interesting. Absolutely. I would agree. So if somebody else out there is listening and they think it's interesting and they want to talk to you about that or some other financial matters, what's it going to cost them to call you?
Nothing. They can call us at 757-903-2127. And if they have student loan debt, we'll set them on a plan to get rid of it.
Good. That's a nice plan. Remind me again of your website.
jossbrown.com.
All right. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Money Talks is a weekly program presented for the listener's benefit and entertainment. It is provided at no cost to the listener, and the ideas, opinions, and comments are not to be construed as legal advice, tax advice, investment advice, or other advice specific to the listener. Listeners are encouraged to seek the advice of a licensed professional or other qualified party when dealing with financial, legal, tax, medical, investment, insurance, taxidermy, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, real estate, chiropractic, veterinary, oral hygiene, hot air ballooning, etc. We have given you some food for thought. Now, call a licensed professional such as Dan Joss at 757-903-2127. Thanks for listening, and remember, failing to plan is planning to fail.